The October 22nd meeting of the Committee to Study State and Municipal Authority Governing Recovery Housing. Welcome, I'm Representative Erica Connors. Today we'll be conducting a remote meeting of the Committee to Study State and Municipal Authority Governing Recovery Housing. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to executive order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone, with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and/or listen to the meeting on Zoom, YouTube, and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. We've provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@ledge.state.nh.us or call 603-271-3043. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where you are located and if anyone else in the room with you during this meeting, which is a requirement under the right to know law. I'm Representative Erica Connors, and I am located in my home office in Manchester, New Hampshire, and I am alone. Senator D'Alessandro?
I'm Senator Lou D'Alessandro. I'm located in my home in Manchester, and I am alone.
Representative Pearson?
I am Representative Pearson from Derry. I am in my home, and at least on this floor, I'm alone. My wife is in the house, but upstairs.
Thank you. Representative Josephson?
Yes, I am. Everyone hear me okay? All right, good. Yes, I am in Lucky's Coffee Garage in Lebanon, New Hampshire. There are 6 employees here in the building with me, but not in this room with me.
Great, thank you. Next on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of our October 20th, 2020 meeting. Do we have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the minutes from our Tuesday, October 20th meeting.
Moved by Representative Josephson. We have a second. Seconded by Representative Pearson. We'll take a roll call on that.
Great.
Senator D'Alessandro is there. Senator D'Alessandro?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Pearson?
Yes.
Representative Josephson?
Yes.
And Representative Connors is a yes.
Right.
Right, next up, we have stakeholder testimony today. Today we have Charlie Hatfield. He is a former Manchester firefighter, and he's been invited to speak to us today about his experience with recovery housing. Charlie, the floor is yours.
As you said, I was a former firefighter, recovering alcoholic, 3 years sobriety, still involved with my local fire department, and just very thankful for a lot of folks along the way. I've had the pleasure and the questionable fun sometime with Steve before, and he's been a terrific guy. And we were chatting, and he mentioned you folks might be interested in having some questions or whatnot. I'm more than happy to discuss my experience as a firefighter, as a recovering alcoholic, both. Whatever questions you folks may have, I'm happy to address if I can.
If you wouldn't mind, just by giving us a little bit of insight into your experience, if you don't mind, with recovery housing and what you've seen from a fireman's perspective, but as well as any other perspectives you could give on that, that would be great.
When it comes to specifically sober housing, I only had one experience with Providence Place in Portland, Maine. I was there for a year. When you go to a rehab facility, when you finally kind of acknowledge you have a problem and all that stuff, there are a series of steps that you're encouraged to take. One of those is going into a rehab facility, which some folks will go into and then go straight back into their lives and continue on as they were. And they're healed and they're sober and everything's great. The majority of folks are strongly encouraged to go into sober living immediately after exiting a rehab facility. In a lot of ways, I can only speak for myself, but I don't think it's uncommon for a lot of people to look at getting sober as basically being reborn, being given back a life, a productive life, a joyous life, dare we say, and get back to, contributing to society and enjoying the things that, we're able to enjoy in life and whatnot. And for me, it's really learning how to tie my shoes again, all over again. How do I do laundry? How do I go food shopping? Now I have to go get gas. It's in some ways, and I don't mean to be dramatic or whatnot, but in some way it is a PTSD of sorts. A lot of alcoholics and drug addicts suffer from some sort of, traumatic background or whatnot. And it's easy to see why they go down those roads. So it's basically learning how to get back into society as a person all over again. And having a solid sober housing facility after that I believe is real key. I had a very fortunate experience at a sober house in Portland, Maine. I was lucky enough that they did, in my opinion, follow safety codes and et cetera, et cetera. It was a safe, secure environment, and I definitely attribute that to my sobriety in being able to get sober in a safe environment. I did hear, and we can always play horror stories of some sober houses that were run by in questionable methods. Some quote unquote sober housing owners or managers would only collect their rent in cash. The sober house I was in had a restrictive policy of which I had to attend a certain number of meetings a week. I had to have a sponsor. I had to be working the steps. I had to have a job. Or if I was independently wealthy, I had to be volunteering 30 hours a week. There were a number of requirements for me in that environment, which, to be dead honest, I needed. And I would dare say that I'll speak for a lot of people that they need that as well. They need that structure. So if they can get into a solid sober house, in some ways that's a lot, that's kind of make or break for a lot of people. And without getting too much into the numbers, I can't give you exact statistics, but 7 out of 10 people in recovery don't make it. And the other 2 have got a 50-50 shot at best. Generally, the odds are that it's 1 in 10 people maybe are going to recover, are going to be able to get sober. If I have a different perspective as a firefighter going into buildings and restaurants and all that stuff, and Steve and I talked about this, we have a spidey sense in certain situations, just like you folks have your spidey sense in your situations. So I can say that I was lucky to be in and land in a safe, sober house. And I guess it's kind of a reflection I felt on, my value as a human being. You're already feeling subhuman. If you go from a solid rehab facility into a questionable sober house, and that shows and that's reflected in the care of the building and et cetera, it all speaks to your state of mind as far as, is getting sober even worth it? If I'm gonna, if sober living is living in a dump with, no real structure or aim or goal at sobriety, then, you might as well just go back into society and take your chances.
Right. Do we have other questions for Mr. Hatfield?
Sure.
Alessandro?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple, and I'm sorry to be distracted. You're working on 90 problems at once, but You say 1 in 10 recovers. Is that a reliable statistic?
Those are the numbers that have always been quoted to me. Have I looked them up specifically on Google or whatnot? I've not.
Okay, well, where could we get validation of that statistic? Because that's a very, I mean, that's a 10% recovery. That's pretty low.
Yes, sir. If I could get back to you, or if I
Sure.
could,
Yeah, that'd be great. Get back to the chairman or get back to me. And then you talked about the facility, and I equate that to the environment. So if the environment is conducive to recovery, and the facility is adequate, and by adequate I mean decent, clean, all of the above. I've been into facilities that aren't very conducive to recovery, so I agree with you on that situation. But the question is, how do you make sure the facilities are adequate, are clean, and how do you ensure that it's an environment that is conducive to recovery? And then the last thing is the cash payment that some people demand. I recognize that as that's a way to take advantage of people, in my opinion. And I've also I've heard about that in conjunction with facilities that have been called safe houses or sober houses here in Manchester. So those are my queries. And you, Charlie, if you're in recovery now.
I'm 3 years sober, so in my world, I will be in recovery until either I drink again or I die.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm sorry, speaking, how do we enforce those? Steve and I were kind of chatting about that, and I guess that I don't know that I can really speak to that other than, enforcing certain codes if we're able to in certain situations, and then checking on them. I don't know how to get around. There's got to be some way to enforce that. And, I know it sounds kind of cloak and daggerish, but it's almost kind of the thing where you want someone to go through the system and get put in a facility like that. And, I don't know how we hold people accountable to doing the right thing. I know in certain circumstances, it could come down to, and again, this is just only my perspective, but I'm already feeling subhuman as a human being. I'm already feeling absolutely worthless, wondering, should I just take a walk somewhere that I never come back from, or do I even make an attempt at recovery? And as you said, sir, and I appreciate your, acknowledging this, it's all about a healthy environment, safety-wise, and also, mental wise, and that's reflected in a clean house and a safe house.
Right.
How do we make sure those standards are enforced? I don't know that I'm able to speak to that. I do know that getting out of a rehab facility and getting into recovery in a sober house, in some ways I've been almost beaten into submission, in a good way, in the sense that I had to acknowledge I had an issue. I had to acknowledge this, and I had to acknowledge that I needed help. And when it comes to help, that means that I'm putting my care into other people who know better than I do, who I believe are going to have my best interest in mind. I don't understand how you can justify sending someone into an environment. Steve and I were chatting about, in a basement apartment with no secondary means of egress, with no smoke detectors, to the, lay person who, Steve and I hear a fire alarm and we're pissed off because it's probably a low battery. Everyone else hears a fire alarm and, you're in fight or flight mode immediately. And you're already confused. You're already doing what everyone else just tells you to do. Go to sober living, go to meetings, all that stuff. Well, no one's saying you have to live in an environment that is unsafe, even by human standards. I mean, at that point, you're just doing what everybody tells you to get sober. And if that means paying your rent in cash, okay, that's what this guy told me to do. So I apologize if I ramble on a bit about this.
Donald, I'm on a Zoom conference.
Representative Pearson, did you have a question as well?
I do. First off, I would like to thank Mr. Hatfield for coming on to this. That for a lot of folks, this is not an easy thing to do, and to share his personal experiences, with this is fantastic. It's always, typically in testimony in committee work, we hear with a lot of stakeholders, and we hear people that have personal interests or vested interests or financial interests in pushing something. And a lot of times, the end user gets lost in this. And I do want to thank Mr. Hatfield for that, as well as bringing his, this perspective that he has, having been in emergency services and being someone that looks, when they go to a restaurant or a movie theater or stay in a hotel, their perspective is, and the things that they look at is different. And and one of the things that I think is very interesting that he says here is, that you're relying on someone else's care or someone else's decision making for your well-being. So I guess my question to Mr. Hatfield would really be, what we've heard earlier in this committee from organizations that in my opinion seem to try to play both sides, and they make decisions that are very financially driven. And I understand that obviously there is a cost associated with this and a financial element involved. But, to me, and you briefly touched on it, and maybe I'll have you expand on this a little bit, is the idea that an environment that is safe in the sense of looking out for your well-being is a little different than, say, the 2.5 children, mom and pop, or parental unit with the children type of thing, where in these facilities, we have acknowledgement from other people here that in a single family home there can be 6 to 8 adults in there, and there can be folks that are struggling in different areas of sobriety. And how does that work? Because I'm not familiar with it, and you lived in a place that I would, that I presume was somewhat like that, with adults that don't know each other, coming together to try to, with a common goal here. But can you kind of touch on what that environment exists like, as far as is the way you interact with each other and the familiarity that you may have with your surroundings?
First and foremost, Steve, you're more than welcome. And to any of you folks, on camera, off camera, I'm more than happy to do whatever I could to answer anybody's questions or help anybody in any way. As far as, and I'm sorry, Steve, you were surprisingly, for you, long-winded. But I, no, I'm sorry. The specific question you were trying to get at, what was my perspective on that, as far as compared to the layperson, or
as far as you're put in an environment with other adults that you guys all have a common goal, but you don't really know each other. I mean, you're strangers in a sense with a common element, but you're also put into an environment that is foreign to you. Not to the level that it's the hotel room that you're staying at because you took a family vacation to Indianapolis or something, but this is a place that you're trying to struggle through your own recovery, your own mentality, whatever that is at the time, and now you're thrust into an environment with people that you don't know, into an unfamiliar setting. And I'd like you to just maybe touch on that, as to what you rely on, let's say, of the facility as far as your safety physical safety, your mental safety? Maybe expounds on that a little bit.
One of the things, as I said before, you kind of have to get beaten down to nothing to a certain extent in order to build yourself back up. And I'm not saying that, you know, we use negative enforcement or measures for that, but you know, that's the way it is. You need to accept that you have a problem and that you need help and you're looking out for other people. So at some point it's all about, you know, just basically submitting to everything and doing, you know, following someone else's lead. And then in the process of getting sober, you learn that you're allowed to establish boundaries. You're allowed to establish personal boundaries and, you know, okay, well, I'll take this certain method of treatment or this or that or behavior to a certain extent. But, you know, at some point as a human being, I'm allowed to say, you know what, that's not cool. You know, you need to stop that. And living in a sober house with a bunch of men trying to, you know, get sober, you know, needless to say, can be, you know, a challenging environment in and of itself. I'm not going to liken it to prison necessarily, but some people are there kind of against their will, not really buying into it and all that stuff. So, as I said, I mean, I think for me, it was more, you know, at some point I learned that I could start setting my own personal boundaries, or at some point my radar goes off where I'm saying like, okay, well, I've been trusting other people to guide me through all this thing, but you know what, in this aspect, I'm really not feeling it. Somebody's dropping the ball here, and there are certain things where I need to like take accountability for myself and establish my own boundaries and start looking around and saying, hey, you know what, they're selling crack 3 doors down. I don't do crack, but for someone who does crack, that sounds fairly appealing. Maybe we should do something about that. And I think it also speaks to, you know, again, the environment. I've been in one rehab in particular where, you know, looking back on it, the conditions were abysmal. You know, we were just, you know, awful in all sorts of regards. And unfortunately, it's all comes down to money. My final rehab was a facility out in Pennsylvania that's known worldwide. And yes, the level of care there was volumes different than the level of care elsewhere. We set protocols and codes, I think, because certain folks aren't thinking about certain situations in certain ways. So I can go in there as a fireman and say, hey, it's great that you allow candles in here. Maybe we shouldn't have them right below the curtains. Whereas, you know, and I'm not saying no, everyone wouldn't have thought of that. Maybe they will. But Steve, we've been to fires that started because of a candle, you know, burning under a curtain. And so we enforce codes, et cetera, because some folks aren't thinking about the scenes like that where, you know, and again, you know, some folks are just beaten into a mentality where, hey, they told me to go to sober living and to go to this place. I'm here, I'm paying my rent in cash, I'm making money, you know, never mind the crack dealer 2 doors down, you know, they don't know any better. And so they just go into a situation assuming that other folks have made it a safe environment for themselves.
So if I can follow up.
Go right ahead.
So what I'm getting at then.
I stepped the window, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So what I'm getting then from you is that it's your opinion or your thought that a sober living facility does have a responsibility to have at least a basic level of safety for you if you're going to be living there.
I think the average brain, you know, and maybe it was just my own brain, but some folks, when you get out of a rehab facility, you're at least hopefully a month sober. Sometimes you can go into an extended program for 90 days or honestly 6 months. I mean, depending on how long it takes and how much money you have, you could stay there for as long as you like, I guess. But when you get out, your brain is still scrambled. You're still in early recovery. The numbers, again, that were quoted to me, and I believe I have seen this written down as well, that they say the body physically takes 1.5 years to resume to get a baseline normal because of all the alcohol that you've been putting through it. So physically alone, it takes 18 months for the human body to get back to normal. They say it takes 5 years for someone's brain to get back to a normally functioning brain that doesn't have that influence of drugs or alcohol in it. So in early recovery, your brain's still fairly scrambled. So when you're getting out of a rehab with a month sober, maybe 6 months sober, you know, you're still just kind of just going through the motions, and hopefully they're the right motions and they land you in a safe environment. You know, the last the last thing anyone else I think is going to be thinking about is, you know, is this place been checked for black mold? Has this place been checked for fire systems, faulty wiring, etc.? I mean, if you're going to advertise yourself as a safe environment to get sober in, to me, that would include not asking a newly sober person to sleep in a basement with no secondary means of egress, et cetera, no smoke detectors. If you're telling me this is a safe environment for me to get sober in, then I would assume that a fire breaks out in the basement and I know about it on the second floor.
Right. Are there any other questions for Mr. Hatfield? Representative Josephson?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hatfield, for coming and joining us today. Thank you very much for coming to join us. It's very nice to have your insight, because like Representative Pearson said, not often do we get to hear from the actual people that legislation affects. So, you know, one thing that other groups have told us that is really important is like the family structure and the familial bonds that you have like with other people living in a facility like this. And you did mention, like, you know, some people are there kind of against their will. They don't necessarily want to be there. But I guess my question is really like, how strong is that? Does that truly, like, you bond together between like 4, 6, 8 people, and you have like a responsibility? Is that something that you saw promoted? And is that like, how integral is that to the care, I guess, in recovery?
One of the things that's been espoused that I firmly believe in as well is that no one else can help an alcoholic like another alcoholic, like someone who's been there in their shoes. And so in the proper, you know, kind of controlled environment, the positive enforcement of fellow people in sobriety is very true. It exists, you know, I mean, Steve and I were talking about this between firemen as well, you know what I mean? And anyone that's in a situation where they're in, you know, that kind of amount of contact with other people, you know, you develop bonds. You know, I've said this before, if a fellow firefighter got in a bar fight, does my brotherhood to him mean that I'm going to back that guy up every time? No. There are some firemen that I, you know, was acquainted with that if I turned around and they were duking it out with somebody, you know, good luck, bud, but you're on your own. You know, we're firemen and I'll do whatever I can for you, but as a human being, you're probably getting what's coming to you. So, you know, and for me, it was about establishing those boundaries for myself as well in a recovery environment. So, you know, you're in a house with a bunch of other people who are learning to be human all over again anyway. So is there a familial bond there? Sure, absolutely. Common, you know, struggles, you know, bond people together. Have I made some amazing relationships in my recovery? Yes, hands down. Life-saving relationships. You know, I don't know how I would have done it without them. Have I met a lot of bozos along the way? Yeah. And again, I apologize to, you know, spout numbers without legitimate background, but the numbers that have been quoted to me is, well, 1 in 10 make it anyway. So just because you're in sober living doesn't mean that you're going to be one of those 10 people. 1 in 10 people trying to get sober are able to do that. And, you know, within the first 3 to 5 years, you know, there's a really telling years as far as, you know, how they're going to be able to get sober like that. So is there a familial bond? Yes. I don't know how that really speaks to public safety. If I have a familial bond with the people that I'm living with in my sober house, then my familial bond cares for those people and I want it to be a safe environment. To me, my definition of a safe environment means smoke detectors, fire extinguishers and accessible points, means of egress.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think, I think that safety and that dedication to somebody else who you've made those bonds with, it creates you're compelled to care for somebody else who's in there with you. If there is an emergency, you work to get, people would work to help each other get out and stuff like that, as opposed to maybe an apartment building where you wouldn't have that so much. But no, that's awesome to hear, and congrats on your 3 years so far. And it's a lifelong journey. My mom was an alcoholic, so I'm familiar with that. So best of luck to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much for everything. The only other thing I guess I'd add to that, something that we had chatted before was, and I don't mean to belittle anyone's argument or point of view or whatnot, but I mean, if someone's coming at this like, we're trying to provide a safe environment for these people and you guys are giving us the runaround, I don't understand that. If we truly care about people in recovery, never mind 1 in 10 make them anyways. So I guess if it burns down, whatever, sorry for the dark humor, but if we truly care about me, if I truly care about myself, and we truly care about people getting sober, I don't understand why this is even a topic. I mean, kids tell you that a safe house has working fire detectors in it and a plan to escape. And someone who's a month sober, I assure you, they're not thinking clearly and their brain is still scrambled. And having them, people like that, having smoke detectors and means of escape, etc. To me, you can't say you're caring about these people when you're fighting something as simple as a smoke detector. So my apologies. I appreciate the time. Thank you so much, folks. I'm happy to talk about this all day long.
Thank you, Charlie. Do we have any other questions for him at this point? All right, thank you so much for coming in and speaking with us today. We really appreciate your perspective. It was very helpful, so thank you very much. Next up, we do not have anybody else to speak with us today. The Department of Justice is not sending somebody to talk to us. Do we want to hear from people who have been listening in, or do we want to move forward straight to our discussion on proposals and our final report? Thoughts?
How about, is there anyone who's from the public who's listening in who'd like to speak? It would be good to gather something from a person who's been listening to this or who has another perspective.
All right, Deb, you had mentioned that there might be some people that had been listening in the last couple of days. Is there anyone that's looking to speak for just a couple minutes today?
I'm not aware of anyone particularly.
Okay. All right.
If there's anybody in the public that is watching right now, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand digitally through Zoom, or if you are on the phone, you can press *9 and we will let you in.
Just give it a couple seconds and give people an opportunity to. We do have some, I'm not sure if everybody heard at the beginning, but we do have some testimony and information coming from zoning as well, at least in Manchester, a perspective there that we should look at and try to incorporate into our report if at all possible as well.
Doesn't look like anybody from the public is raising their hand or trying to speak, Representative.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I guess we need to go forward and discuss what our possible recommendations are for future legislation for this upcoming term. I know there was a lot of talk earlier on about HB 311, which was one that I had put forward earlier. It had been changed along the process, looking for basically a variance or an exception for certain homes to have a reduced fire code from boarding and rooming houses. I'm not sure if people would like to continue with that option or if we have other ideas. Thoughts from the group? Anybody who would like to speak?
Well, we've brought a couple of pieces of legislation forward. As I said, when I started on this project, I'm thinking it was 4 years ago when we first were informed by a group in Franklin about people being taken advantage of in facilities that were called sober housing. So let's start there. what do we have on the books now? Health and Human Services put together a series of proposals. Where are we with regard to those? Because I know, Erica, you introduced some other legislation. Was it in the last session?
It was in the last session, but it was separate from that. My legislation was based on fire and safety code. We did have some legislation that did go through, which DHHS spoke to us about the other day. They now have a voluntary registration program where different sober homes can apply and be certified through NH Core, and then they will be listed on the New Hampshire's website through DHHS as a place that can receive funding and can receive referrals. So that is one step, positive step that definitely has been taken so far, but I'm not sure it addresses some of the concerns we've had about, I hate to say it, but bad actors, people who are looking just to make money and are charging people and kind of flying under the radar that we don't necessarily know exist until there is a problem.
Yeah, well, I think that's a legitimate concern. That seemed to be the case where places were popping up who didn't fall into the category of proper supervision, proper environment, and so forth, but they were somehow categorizing themselves or using the term safe housing or sober housing. So the question is, how do we deal with those? Do you deal with those locally based on an ordinance, or is there a state overview that says you have to follow this procedure and then comply with the local rules? And the local rules would be safety. I mean, as pointed out by the person who spoke with us, access, egress, fire alarms, or smoke detectors, and adequate fire protection. That seemed to be a kind of a significant issue. But
I know there has been some concern along the way about leaving it up to municipalities for their local code, because different sober homes might have several different facilities in different towns, and we don't want to put somebody in a position where they're liable because they're following different codes.
Right. Yeah. I think that
our municipalities up to lawsuit that way either. In my opinion, I would think that going the route of a state approved would be better.
Well,
Other thoughts?
There's also the social stigma that's associated with this. I know I want it every place except in my backyard. I know that we have a place on the west side over by St. Raphael's that was constructed for people who are transitioning from prison outside, and that was met with some resistance, but they have adhered to all of the local regulations, and that seems to be functioning well. But I think people want to know. I would think the individual who's going into this sober house would want to know, this is a place where I'm going to get looked after, and I'm going to be in an environment. And I thought that our person said, is the facility decent, and is the environment conducive to recovery? And if his numbers are correct, 1 out of 10 actually recovers. If both of those things aren't looked after, then the chances of success are de minimis, and getting even more convoluted as the process goes on. So,
So how do we differentiate then between those that are following, say local guidelines, even ones that are following rooming and boarding house ones, or the ones that are following New Hampshire core standards? We have a list of those places that have been approved, but we also have other places that are not.
right.
And differently, is there a way to go about that without causing issues with fair housing?
Well, I think that's what our presenter, I got in on the last one when our first meeting, and you run into the fair housing laws And, we're running into those problems now at what used to be the old elderly housing entities here in Manchester. And the problems that now have ensued is who's in there, how do they get in there, are they behaving, et cetera. Those problems exacerbated when you went from a restricted situation of only older people to opening it up. Now, I have most of those high rises in my district, so I'm dealing with those problems. I think we got a Pandora's box here in the kind of an analogous situation as to who goes to these places, how are these places looked after? Do you look after them? Does the health department have to sanction it? Does the fire department have to sanction it? And all of those things give credibility to the facility. And then how much is over-regulation? And look at people are looking for places. I mean, fair housing is becoming a significant issue at a time when you can't find housing. So I think all of these things are in play. Now, does the New Hampshire Coalition on Recovery Residents, is that a viable place to start in terms of oversight? People applying and becoming sort of recognized as a decent place. Is that a good place to start? Does that work?
Well, they are already doing that. They now have that through DHHS. They are the body that is going through and certifying and becoming part of that list through DHHS. So they're already in that position. For me, it's the question about what about these other places that are not following any of those guidelines. Representative Pearson, you look like you want.
Yeah, a couple things. Just looking over my notes of the various people that have testified here. One of the things that we learned from Attorney Barry, was the fact that certified versus non-certified facilities are really just treated the same. So that lends itself to what the value of certification is. And when we talk about NH Core, one of the things that I think is problematic with their certification is the fact that their certification is something they came up with on their own. And that has not had the input from the State Fire Marshal's office. It has not had the input of the legislature. It has not had the input of other people as to what their certification standards are. I mean, based on the testimony of Kim Buck, she literally made the statement that a walkthrough by a local fire department would be considered oppressive. I mean, that was her words. And, if we're in the idea that, and based on, what Mr. Hatfield said, if we're in a situation that, the just basic fundamental safety of folks is not a priority, then what are we doing here? I mean, this is the one group that is supposed to be certifying, or we're relying through DHHS to certify these places if they choose to be certified, is also the organization that seems to be fighting against some of these basic core elements. And that seems a little bit problematic to me, in the sense that we just haven't had a say as to what really the minimum standards are.
Well, who's going to set the minimum standards? Because you got HHS at one level, you've got the local municipality at another level, and then you have the services. You have the fire department that it wants a building code situation. So as you begin to develop these tiers, are they working in concert with one another, or are they working against each other? And that seems to be one of the problems. Now, the Coalition of Recovery got money from the Governor's Commission on Alcohol and Drugs, right? They got $375,000 and what was that for? To develop a process by which they evaluate the sober housing. So don't they have a criteria that they have established? I mean, they must have presented something to the Governor's Commission to get that kind of a grant. What did they present?
I think Jenny O'Higgins might have an answer to that, if you want me to bring her in.
Or go right ahead, Jenny.
Hi there. I just wanted to let you know the standards are set by the National Association of Recovery Residences. So NH Core is New Hampshire's affiliate of a national organization, and they are monitoring national standards. And I emailed those over to Deb to make sure that you all had the actual document that goes through all of the standards, including fire safety. I'm not at all saying that those are answering all of your questions, but wanted to make sure you had your hands on them.
So Jenny, what you're saying is that there's an overview that's already in place.
Correct.
Now-
And NH Core did not come up with the certification standards. They are a national standard.
Right. Okay.
Core follows.
All right. So we have a national standard that's been accepted by somebody,
Yes,
right? And who's validated the national standard?
the National Alliance of Recovery Residences. So, and you can see in their standards sort of the process that they went through in order to validate each of the criteria. So there's a companion document to the standards that explains why those standards were selected and how they were selected. And it is very helpful. I also sent a policy toolkit for states created by the National Council on Mental Health and Behavioral Health around recovery housing, and it crosswalks how other states are handling this issue as well.
Uh-huh. So do we have successful models to look at?
It is fairly complex in that some that have taken a stricter approach are now up against fair housing lawsuits, and some that have required certification or had a voluntary certification program seem to be the most successful. Again, I do not think that solution solves everything that you all have talked about in these couple of meetings. I think it is our best step forward from what we can see in the current research. So I'm sorry, I guess my answer is that it's not a perfect answer, but we have researched this, and we've also reached out to our counterparts in other states and tried to learn a lot more about how far they've gotten. The voluntary certification was really our next best step.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you. That's very helpful.
So that information has been sent to us now. Is that correct, Deb, or has
Yeah.
it yet?
Yes, you should have gotten it last night.
Okay. Did other members get that last night?
All members of the committee got it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. I got this one, Deb, that from Jennifer O'Higgins that came at 3:41 p.m. Is that the one you're referencing?
I don't know what I sent you. Yes, that's the one. Senator, that's the one.
Right. Okay. I've got that. I've got that before me.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
The policy toolkit I sent additionally just now. As I was listening to you all talk, I realized that additional document might also be helpful. So that was not a part of what I sent yesterday.
Thank you. Sonia, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to let you know that Sean Toomey has a hand raised.
Okay. Are we okay with Sean coming through to speak to us from the
Sure.
fire marshal's office? All right, Sean, go right ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I can speak mostly to the fire code side of the issue, I guess, in the building code a little bit. But just as a reminder, we have the framework in the building and fire codes for different residential living situations. A single family home, a group living up from 4 to 16 people, and then more of a hotel dorm situation for more than 16 people. And we have that framework in our current state building and fire codes. Most often we're seeing the challenge now of, as we've talked about earlier, is the reasonable accommodations for treating them as like a family for the recovery residents. And most often, in the 4 to 16 people range, we want to treat it like a single family home. And the sprinkler system conversation is the one that probably jumps out as the biggest issue when we've worked with some of the recovery houses so far. And we're looking at, as Charlie indicated, and some of the other conversations, making sure there's good smoke alarms, good egress, fire extinguishers, the systems maintained. I won't repeat it. We've talked about those things, but just I guess as a reminder that we have a framework now for sort of putting people into different buckets. The difference is, I think we're struggling with a little bit is making sure we have solid foundation of if we're not going to put them in a lodging and rooming situation, if they're in the group of 4 to 16, because they're recovery residents, and we're going to bring them back to a single family home, that we're on solid ground there. So happy to answer any questions. Just want to kind of throw that out there for info.
John, I do have a question for you. Are you familiar with the NAR standards and NH Core standards that people are currently being certified under, and how closely related are they to fire standards that you think are appropriate?
I'd want to look at them in a little bit more detail. It's been a little bit, honestly, that I've looked at them. I would say that we're using that model, and some of the framework we used in 311 for some of the more recent variances that we've issued without the sprinkler. So I think we're almost there on the fire code side of things for most facilities. I think the Marshall and I have talked about probably the last nugget for us is, do we stay within the up to 16 people? Is that in the lodging and rooming, that comes back to a single family? But what happens if it's a big home and they put 30 people in it? Is 30 people in a single family home a reasonable number? And I think that's probably the one we're still navigating a little bit. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I would say that probably once you hit 30 people, you might not be able to consider that a single family unit of people anyways. I know there are definite exceptions around the country to that as well, though.
I have a question for Mr. Toomey, if he's still on.
Go right ahead.
I am.
Thank you, Sean. How do you guys define family, and what does being a family mean here? Because we've seen that thrown around, and it seems as though that's what defines a quote unquote family seems to be used when it's convenient to try to get out of something. And I'm, under the fire code, how do you view what exactly a family, quote unquote family, consists of?
So historically, we talked about, I think Representative, you mentioned it a little earlier, it's the typical, the mother, father, and, a few kids is what we've always thought of it as. And in a single family, from the life safety code perspective, so far it's, a single family with up to 3 outsiders is how we've considered a single family home. The life safety code, which is part of our state fire code, doesn't define what family is, and we have to look to the dictionary. And I think that's where the dictionary definition of family, and I apologize, I don't have it right in front of me, kind of allows it to expand the scope. And I think that's where our federal courts have ruled that these, good Oxford style sober living facility has a family type living arrangement. And, it's not for us to define. I was honestly a bit skeptical when I first got into this with Marshall Precy, when we both came in the office a couple of years ago. But having been to several now, there's some facilities that are run amazing, and some that are, are a concern for us from a fire safety perspective, making sure that the people that are there trying to become sober are in a safe environment. And I think, I think it has to be almost a case by case basis with a good structure behind it. Some of the things we've talked about, and it came up a little bit ago, is how do we deal with the ones that are good versus the ones that are bad? And legally, I don't know, I'm not an attorney, but if we have the NAR standard, we have the framework, they're running clean, they have the reasonable accommodation. Well, the people that don't, do we have an opportunity? The ones that don't run it right and don't follow the structure and the NAR standards and the exception, reasonable accommodation for essentially a sprinkler system, that they become a regular rooming and lodging house, and they have to follow the rules as if a rooming and lodging house, because they don't have. You go into these and you say, where's, who's the guy that's upstairs in the room 3, and people have no idea. Well, that's not a family. And we've had some of those situations, but I don't know. I think we're going to need some legal help understanding how to make that work. But clearly there's some that you can walk into and they know everybody by name, where they are. Oh yeah, so-and-so is working at this place today. And they're going to care for each other. And, we heard it today from Charlie, and I think from some of the conversation, that when you first get there, you're the newbie, but they're going to take you in and care for you and help you get onto your road to recovery.
All right, thank you, Sean. Anybody else have any comments on that? Representative Josephson?
Yeah, basically for me, I'm trying to figure out how to thread that needle.
Representative Josephson, I think you're cutting out. I'm not sure. Can anybody else hear Representative Josephson?
No, we've lost your audio.
We lost him.
All right.
I'm wondering if it's maybe like you tie the, the certification process, maybe beef that up with more fire safety. I know that she was, like you said, Representative Pearson, she said that was, oppressive to have a fire walkthrough, but I'm not sure how you thread that needle of the Fair Housing Act to make sure it's safe, because you have a little more turnover than you would in a normal family, because you might have a complete turnover in 2 years. Whereas if you have a family living in there, they won't turn over in 2 years. You know what I'm saying? So I'm trying to figure out how to thread that needle. Tough one.
It's interesting that you talk about turnover, because we have real estate laws and in the laws that govern the transfer of property and certain things that houses are required to have when they're turned over. So
yeah,
right. So if we're in a situation where New Hampshire Corps is finding something as simple as a requirement for a property transfer to be an unacceptable burden, I question the standards in which they operate under.
Yeah, no, I'm wondering if you tie it to being similar to how, like, if you had an apartment between renters, if like in between two different parties renting, would you have to have a walkthrough for that? Probably not so much, but you would have to have a walkthrough when you do sell a house, So how do you tie that together? Yeesh.
In along the definition, the lines of family, typically family isn't, we don't charge the kids rent. We're not, you know what I mean? I don't charge my wife rent, live in my house. Although she would probably charge me if she could get away with it. But the point is that, from a social context, the word family exists, but from a transactional and financial standpoint, clearly not. If these people are all literally tenants paying rent or a fee or whatever crazy term you want to use to stay in this facility. This isn't sweet Uncle Lou coming over to stay in the spare bedroom for a month.
Right.
They're a business type relationship. Correct. Yep.
So yeah, I guess maybe some legal guidance as to how that is narrowly. You have the family as far, the family unit as far as them staying together, but there is a transactional component where they are, you do have a renter landlord situation to a degree.
Although I will say that does get tricky, because a lot of people have older children, college-age children that are living with them and paying rent to them as well. And then that becomes a business relationship, even though they are family as well. I mean, it's very complex. This whole situation has been looked at across the country, and everyone's trying to figure out, I think, solutions to the same set of problems. And I don't know that we have a good answer right now. The question is, what do we want to do for New Hampshire moving forward? Is there a way that we can proceed and gain a little bit of ground here without opening everyone up to lawsuit?
Question for the chair: would it be permissible to have Mr. Hatfield is asking me if he can chime in? Is that still permitted for him to
would be
offer?
Yes, go right ahead, Mr. Hatfield.
He's still on.
Thank you. And I don't mean to, muddy the waters too much more, but yeah, I mean, it does seem like this word family is what everything is kind of hinging on. And for, I don't want to speak ill of anyone else, but when I went into sober living for my own recovery, I'm learning to be human again. I'm learning to establish boundaries and all that stuff. I do feel a common bond with the people in recovery. That doesn't mean I leave my wallet on the table. So is there a bond within human beings in recovery? Of course, there is a bond between human beings and bird watchers and all that stuff. And so, yes, there is a bond there, but does it qualify? I mean, what does the word family mean? Meaning that, you know, I turn around and I unequivocally help them out in any kind of situation they're in because they're family? Then no, I would say that shouldn't be a family environment. I'm, you know, helping the guys around me and they're helping me as best they can. But at the same time, you know, some of those guys end up not making it. And sometimes it's me who says, dude, you smell like booze. So, you know, I mean, are these family members? And then I guess I would take it one step further, that one of the best things that my family did for me was cut me off. You can only help someone for so long. And if they're not willing to help themselves, there's nothing you can do for them. And that goes for recovery, that goes for everyone. And again, I mean, if we're trying to define what determines a family here, well, one of the greatest gifts my family gave me was total independence. They wanted nothing more to do with me, and those were the things. Thank you for letting me chime in. All this stuff is really, really interesting.
Thank you. Do we need more time to review documents and get back together again? What is your thought as a committee on moving forward here? We have just a few days before we have to send a report forward and come up with proposals for legislation. I mean, I believe I would like to review the documents that came through from Jenny O'Higgins a little further.
Yeah, I would like the weekend to kind of chew on them.
Representative Pearson, go ahead.
Thank you. The other thing too, you know, New Hampshire Court is following a set of national standards, but and we've done this in New Hampshire countless times. We've taken national standards and modified them. I mean, we literally do it with the fire code right now. We take the NFPA standard and we erase massive amounts of paragraphs out of it that we get rid of in New Hampshire. And we have other standards where New Hampshire may add a couple of little things that are, you know, that we feel are necessary for where we live, you know, where we are in our situation. So, you know, I think that the fire marshal's office clearly has an issue with the standard that is brought for that this national standard, because I mean, we're going back over 4, 5, 6, 8 years of both at the state level and some municipalities having an issue that these national standards are falling short a little bit. So, you know, is this a situation where the state of New Hampshire says, you know what, the national standards that New Hampshire Corps is using are great, but we're going to add 1 or 2 little things onto this, and that now we consider that the New Hampshire standard, and let's make this the uniform set of rules to get certification. And then at that point, I guess everybody's kind of happy here.
And I guess we need to consider whether people are going to follow those national standards for recovery housing. And if they don't follow them, does that mean they are not considered a recovery housing unit, or where do we fall there? So I would like the weekend, I believe, to look over the documents, refresh my memory on the national standards as well and where they fall in with New Hampshire Fire Code, and reconvene possibly early next week just to finish things up and come up with our proposals. Do you all agree with that, or are there other thoughts?
I think that sounds good to me.
Representative, do you want me to go over what is open next week for Zoom?
Yes, please.
All right, so.
Let me get my schedule.
Okay. So it looks like Tuesday morning is booked up. Tuesday afternoon at 1, we have something. So we could do it Tuesday at 3. Wednesday morning up until 11 a.m. we have something available. And then Thursday is wide open.
Are you folks available Tuesday at 3? I would think sooner rather than later. No, Representative Pearson, you are not.
I will be on duty, and that itself a lot of variables.
All right, so you're on a 3-day schedule, is that correct?
Yeah, Wednesday, Thursday is fine for me, certainly.
Okay.
Anytime.
Thursday morning, a possibility for folks?
Wednesday morning is great.
Yeah,
I can't do Wednesday morning. Is Thursday morning a possibility?
I can't do Thursday morning. I got a 10 o'clock Zoom call.
Okay, what else do you have, Senator, what else do you have available on Thursday? Because he did say Thursday was wide open on the calendar.
Yeah, well, Thursday afternoon, I've just got this thing with with Nashua and the mayor of Nashua, and that's been changed to 10 o'clock Thursday morning. So how about Thursday afternoon, 1 o'clock, something like that?
Yes,
Got
can
it.
we have Thursday at 1 o'clock?
That's awesome.
All
Is
right.
that good? Is that good for everybody?
Yeah.
All right.
Thursday at 1?
We can try to book that, and we're just going to have to work pretty quickly to put that report together because November 1st is just a couple days off from that, so we'll have to get it out for Friday. Is that a possibility, Deb?
That's going to be tough, but I'll do what I can do.
All right. All
And
right.
she does it well, and she does it well. I want to say that categorically. There's nobody as efficient as Deb.
All right. Seeing that then, is there any other business that needs to be covered today? Looks like we all have our research to do the rest of this week and weekend, and we will meet Thursday at 1 o'clock. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by
I'll
Senator
move.
Alessandro, seconded by Representative Josephson. Senator D'Alessandro,
Yes.
Representative Pearson,
Yes.
Representative Josephson,
Yes.
Representative Connors is a yes. We are adjourned, and we will see you all on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Sonia.
you.
Take care. Thank you, Curly. Have a great American Day.
You too, Senator.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Charlie. Appreciate your contribution. Thank you.
Deb, I'll send you over the notice stuff right now.
Okay.